The August 10th Committee of the Whole will please come to order. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Taberky?
Present.
Mr. Brickwig?
Here.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Here.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Here.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Here.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Here.
And Mr. Schildmeyer.
Present. Let the record show that all 7 members are present. Members of council, what is your pleasure on the approval of the written minutes of the July 20th council meeting?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
I make a motion to approve the written minutes of the July 20th council meeting.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld to approve the written minutes of the July 20th council meeting. Are there any remarks? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? So ordered. We'll move to reports of administrative officials. Mayor Stuchel.
Yeah, there we go. The last time I didn't have a button. Just so you're aware, again, we're postponing the K-9 presentation until the August 24th council meeting. I'd also like to thank the entire community for making the 2023 German Luau a success. We couldn't have done it without our awesome committee, which really doesn't consist of that many people, hint, hint. So our service, police, and fire departments were great, our awesome sponsors, our local schools, and other community organizations that ran the booths. We couldn't have done it without you. It was a great weekend, and we were able to bring back the parade, which people loved. We were also able to honor a very well-deserved community advocate and village historian, Marge Neeson, with a proclamation declaring Saturday, August 5th, as Marge Neeson Day in the village of St. Bernard. Again, thank you to everyone who made this weekend the weekend of the year. Today, I had the pleasure of swearing in Michael Matheson as the newest firefighter EMT in the St. Bernard Fire Department. I'm very excited for this young man and look forward as he grows within the department. I'm also currently working with the service department on their contract and should have something for you to review very shortly. This evening, you also have Ordinance 24 in front of you that allows the village to enter into a joint agreement with the Board of Hamilton County Commissioners in Hamilton County to administer a community revitalization grant for the demolition of the St. Bernard Square. Just to clarify, this does not include Skyline and Bigby. This grant is a reimbursement grant for this project and is the amount of $339,000. Any cost above and beyond this would be the responsibility of the CIC and the developer. You might ask how the village received this grant. We worked with Alloy Development on this, and it was recommended that we focus on this project, which scored very well based on the 4 program criteria: project impact, project need, project support, and applicant capacity. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Auditor, Ms. Brickwig.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a couple announcements. I did have to cash in some of $300,000 from our reserves to pay for some of these major projects we're doing, but there's a good chance I'll be able to put that back in, so I'm not that concerned. It's just they're all hitting at once. I also want to let everybody know I'm working on the expenses of the luau, and once I get those done, I'll give you the final numbers. And I will need an ordinance on the table for the next meeting for the $339,000 for the demolition, since we have to pay up front and then get reimbursed. And that concludes my report.
Mr. President,
Thank you. Mr. Taberky.
make a motion, put an ordinance on the table for the money for demolition.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
Motion by Mr. Taberky, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld to put an ordinance on the table for the next council meeting to appropriate the $339,000 for the demo. Are there any remarks? Not everyone in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? So ordered. All right. Law Director, Ms. Van Valkenburg.
Thank you. You have before you ordinance number 21, which would amend the St. Bernard Codified Ordinances regarding Chapter 905, trees, weeds, and litter. We met with the public and members of the Laws, Contracts, and Claims Committee, as well as a couple other members of council. About 2 weeks ago, I incorporated certain revisions that we had discussed at that time. It was circulated, and it's been posted on the village website earlier this week. So that's before you, and I think Ms. Bettinghouse will have a few other comments. We are scheduled for a Laws, Contracts, and Claims Committee next week on the 16th at 6:30. Possibly, I think downstairs in the other building. I'm not sure where that's going to be. We'll kind of wait and see where we'll post it, but might depend on if we can get back into the council chambers. Otherwise, we'll probably hold it downstairs as we have been doing. But we'll be discussing, amongst other things, the revisions to the trash ordinance, and also probably like an initial draft of the short-term rental ordinance that we're preparing. Probably need to come out with the trash ordinance and have that on the table for the next the next council meeting. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Safety and Service Director, Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. President. The elevator, twist of fate. So they send a person from the new company. He gets here and he phones me from downstairs and said, "Can you come down to the mechanical room?" I go down and he's got a big smile on his face, and he shows me a picture, and it's a date of our switch on the elevators from 1973. He goes, "My father put this in." I worked with my father for 15 years. So when the boss handed me this and told me I had to go to St. Bernard, he says, "I know it very well." So he came in, fixed it. It's not the board. Otis, if it was, we would be having a discussion, but it's not. So basically, he asked me to do him a favor after he fixed it, is to order 2 new switches so we can replace the 1973 models, and I did. So the elevator will be fixed. It's running now, it's fixed, but it'll have new switches that are updated for $1,900, so that saves us a lot of money there. Next would be the HVAC system here at City Hall. So you know as well as I do that I come to you periodically and say, "Hey, we need more money for City Hall." And 9 times out of 10, it's HVAC. So I had companies come in. I wanted 3, I got 2. One does work with Sourcewell, which is the National Joint Association. So with the 2 bids, one was $115,000, the other one was $110,000. These are to replace the 4 big units on top of City Hall, not your municipal building, not here. So the 110 would be if we hired them to do all 4 at the same time. They, however, can break them down, but that adds just around, it would go up to like 126,000. So to me, that's not quite worth it to do them individually. We should have them fixed all together if you think that is necessary. We did have an outage yesterday, which was caused again by the air conditioning unit, but that has been repaired. I haven't got the bill for that yet, but it's a constant here. And their dates also are very antiquated. I mean, these things have been here since the building, so, and we've been nursing them along, so we may want to keep that in mind. And this will tie into the system that we just upgraded. I don't know how many of you guys remember when we did the Jade system, so I could do it on my computer. These will tie into that because that was expensive for us to purchase that. So, and that concludes my report. Thank you.
So just a question, are you asking for an ordinance for these units, or is this down the road?
Well, Mr. President, I had to mention it to council, and I haven't spoken to Jonathan yet about what we prefer to do here. So once I do that, then we'll move forward.
Okay, all right, thank you. Tax, is there a report from the tax administrator? Nothing. All right, at this time, we'll move to reports of standing committees. Finance, Mr. Taberkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thursday, October 6th at 6:30, I'll be hosting my last Meet the Candidate Night here in the municipal building. I'll be in contact with all the candidates to inform them. I plan on doing the same procedures we did the past couple of years. If you have an opponent, you'll be given 3 to 4 minutes to give your political spiel. Then after everybody goes through, we'll open the floor to questions. Here's my report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Safety, Mr. Berkway.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight I have the police activity report for July. The police had 905 calls for service, resulting in 743 contacts. There were an additional 574 other services or details that were not necessarily called in by the public. These calls for service included 43 total criminal offenses that resulted in 122 criminal arrests, including 7 OVIs, 88 traffic citations, including 22 for speed, as well as 156 traffic warnings, including 28 for speed. They also responded to 21 accidents as well. As far as some notes, I'm like to remind you that the annual Police and Fire Benevolent Steak Fry is rapidly approaching. It will be held on Friday, September 15th in Vine Street Park. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the association. As a special addition to this year's event, there will be a band to add to the festivities. Everyone is encouraged to get their tickets in advance, as this event will more than likely sell out prior to the day of the event. Tickets are $20 each and are being sold by all the officers of each department. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Service, Ms. Housefeld.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight I have the waste collection fees for the month of May, which was $28,024.93, and that was remitted to the village. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Public improvements, Mr. Culbertson, Mr. Bob Culbertson, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next CIC meeting will be Tuesday, August 22nd, right here, unless we're able to move back to council chambers. And if anyone's interested in joining the CIC, please reach out to one of the board members and let them know that you're interested. There is a position that's available that has to be filled by a resident. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Laws, contracts, and claims, Ms. Bettingham.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before council tonight, you have a proposed version of the Chapter 905, Trees, Weeds, and Litter. I'm going to explain a little bit about this ordinance, mostly about the summary of the meat of what the amendments was in this particular ordinance. So under the first section, under 905.01, the trimming of trees, plants, and shrubbery, Section D was added to address unsightliness, intrusion into public spaces, and/or hazardous nature of trees, plants, and shrubbery. That's just a summary of what that paragraph is. 905.2 is being reserved for future legislation that is pertaining to what is referred to as cultivated plants that are grown on personal property instead of grass. That was not the focus of this ordinance at the time. The focus was really to understand and make sure that the verbiage was in there for citizens to understand what the rules are for grass cutting and shrubbery and what the violations were and what the penalties were. So 905.4 is notice to the owners, time allotted for abatement was the main focus for this specific area. For amending the ordinance, this section provides information on how an owner or person in control of a property is served notice of a violation and that the violation must be rectified completely. And that was a key word here, completely. Needs to be completed within 5 days of that person getting the notice. There were times where this was not real clear. Somebody would start cutting a strip of their grass. The other part of the grass was still 15 inches high, and nothing was done because it wasn't really understood that it needs to be completed. So we added that it's going to be completed within 5 days of receiving a notice by the owner or the person in control, like I said. Subsequent violations within 1 calendar year of the initial notice does not need to have any further notification and needs to be abated immediately. And Section 905.05 addresses the abatement and assessment of cost to the owner or person in control will be charged for the cutting of the grass, weeds, litter removal. If not paid by the owner or the person in control, it will have a lien put upon their property. And then the enforcement of this ordinance shall be the Director of Public Service and Safety or their designee. So that was the main focus of amending that ordinance. Again, there is going to be more meetings coming up about the cultivated plants and shrubbery that people put in their personal property instead of the grass. But that wasn't the focus of this ordinance. There are still verbiage in this ordinance about cultivated plants and things that are considered hazardous shrubbery. That was all there before that. We did not change anything in the ordinance relative to that. Valerie, is there anything else I'm missing?
Well, actually, I did, and I had lined through it, was one of those things that was underlined, or excuse me, stricken through. I did actually take, in the previous ordinance, they did name off a number of weeds specifically. I did take that out because there had been, that was one of the things that I had stricken through. And that was because there was some discussion, should we follow what the, the specific, there are in the Ohio administrative codes, there are specific things set out. And ours did not comport with that. So when we get to the point where we're actually talking about, the actual plans, I thought I did take out the strike-through part, and we can address those issues at that time.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else you want to add from my summary?
Yeah, I had made a comment about, did we want to change the notice to within the 1 calendar year or the same calendar year? And it actually, as it presently reads, is the same calendar year as opposed to 1 calendar year, because I wanted to make sure we're clarified that if you got cited in 2003, the period would run through 2003, but next 2004 growing season basically started
Okay.
again. So that was, I put that in for purposes of clarification.
Thanks for the clarification.
And then, so I don't know if you have any other questions, but I think that pretty much wraps it up.
Anybody else on council have any questions relative to what this ordinance for, that we need to put on for council for vote?
Cindy, just a quick question. You said that you had talked about it being completed or completely done. Am I missing that verbiage in here, or?
It says it shall be abated. Shall
be abated. That's-
Okay.
yeah.
Shall is mandatory.
Okay, all right.
Sorry,
That's all right, I just wanted to make sure.
I used my terms.
It's all right. Anyone else? Anything else, Cindy?
No, that concludes my report.
Thank you.
But I do need a motion to put that on for the council. For the special, I'll make a motion to put ordinance number 21 on for council for a vote.
I'll second that.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Mr. Schultmeyer to place ordinance 21 on the table at the special meeting. Are there any other remarks? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. All right. Marketing, Mr. Ray Culbertson.
Thanks, Mr. President. Tomorrow night, Friday, August 11th, there will be an adult night at the Aquatic Center. The event is from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., and music will be provided by Wild Bill Hilton. The Bengals-Packers preseason game will also be on the big screen TV. On Friday, August 25th, there will be a family night at the Aquatic Center, where there will be a movie playing in the pavilion for the kids. Since I just turned 50 this year, I thought it would be perfect to talk about the St. Bernard Senior Citizens Club. The club meets every Wednesday in the main level of the municipal building from 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. This club is for St. Bernard residents who are 50 years of age or older. Former residents who now live in a retirement or nursing home are eligible to join. To become a member, all you need to do is come to the meeting and provide your name, address, phone number, and date of birth. If you have any questions, please reach out to Club President Brenda Hensley at 513-535-1672. Thanks, that concludes my report.
Thank you. Business and Industry, Mr. Schultmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really just wanted to point out that, as Jonathan mentioned, Alloy Development was very helpful in getting our grant for the demolition. So I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but we have them basically on a retainer, and we pay them on a monthly basis. So for them to produce something that far exceeds what we pay them every month is good to see this early in their contract. So that concludes my report.
Thank you. I do believe that at the council meeting, we made a motion to place ordinance 24 on the table if we got the paperwork, but just for, if I could have a motion to place ordinance 24 on the table this evening for the special council meeting.
Mr. President,
Mr. DeBerke.
make a motion to put ordinance 24, 2023 on the table.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
Motion by Mr. DeBerke, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld to place ordinance 24, 2023 on the table at the special meeting. Any remarks? Not all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? So ordered. At this time, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council this evening? If so, feel free to step to the microphone up there. If not,
Mr. President,
Mr. DeBerke.
I forgot, Jonathan, on The police coming for the K-9, can you get a listing of how many times the past 10 years we've had to call a K-9 unit in the town?
I can,
Thank
yes.
you.
I also
Mayor.
actually have a request, if possible. I think we could fit it in. I'd like to ask if we could have a motion to go into executive session for the purchase of property.
Mr. President?
Someone,
Mr. President,
Mr.
I make,
President?
I make a motion to go to executive session for the purchase of property.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Ms. Hausfeld to go into executive session to discuss purchase of property. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Turkey? Mr. Brickwig?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schildmeyer?
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Currently, council will go into executive session to discuss purchase of property. The special council meeting will start at 7:45.
Mr. President, you started before I got my mouth open, sorry. I was not thinking, but I also need to go into executive session at the end of committee of the whole to discuss pending litigation.
President,
Mr. DeBerke,
make a motion to go into executive session for pending litigation also.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
a motion by Mr. DeBerke, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld to also meet in executive session to discuss pending litigation. Clerk, will you call the roll again?
Mr. Turkey?
Aye.
Mr. Brickwig?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schildmeyer?
7 ayes, no nays. That motion carries also. Council will go meet in executive session, and as I say, we will be back by 7:45.
There's two ordinances.
For tonight's meeting. This
Yeah.
is for next council
That's for
meeting.
next council.
Oh,
The auditor asked for,
sorry.
that's okay. So that is that. So at this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole meeting.
Mr. President,
Mr. Culbertson. Right,
I'm-
Mr. Bob Culbertson.
make a motion that we adjourn.
I'll second it.
Motion by Mr. Bob Culbertson, seconded by Mr. Ray Culbertson to adjourn the committee of the whole meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. The special council meeting will start in approximately 5 minutes.
Mr. Brickway?
Here.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Here.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Here.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Here.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Here.
And Mr. Schildmeyer.
Present.
Let the record show that all 7 members are present. Clerk, would you please give the first reading of ordinance number 21, 2023?
Ordinance number 21, 2023, amending the St. Bernard Codified Ordinances, Chapter 905, Trees, Weeds, and Litter, and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 21, 2023. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 2123.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld, to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 21, 2023. Are there any remarks? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 21, 2023? If so, at the podium, please state your name and address for the record.
Nicole Klungel, 551 Church Street. The first comment I want to make is the mics are fabulous. I don't know if you got new ones, but I can hear you so well, and it's amazing. I love it. I wanted to point out, I think there is a tiny typo in 905.05A. It says the Director of Public Service and Safety or their designer may enter the property. I think that's designate. Yeah. I know there is no appeals process in this ordinance by design, but I really think there should be when you're entering private property to make changes. I also see that there is no listed process for determination of fees. And I'm very curious whether, in the Laws, Contracts, and Claims Committee meeting, it was discussed that the village could send service department workers to abate or hire a contractor to do so. And presumably, the cost to the village would vary with this. And I would be very curious what would prevent the village from hiring somebody more expensive to do a specific property and hire somebody less expensive to do another property. And finally, I am wondering how liability for injury will be handled. If somebody, say a village employee, is sent to abate a property and is injured on that property, who incurs the liability for that?
Mr. President, I can answer the last part.
Ms. Brickway.
All of our employees are covered under workers' comp, so it would probably just go right under their workers' comp. It doesn't matter what property they're on or not, because they could get hurt anywhere, but as long as they're working under the city, it would be covered under that.
Did any council member know that?
I knew that.
Mr. President,
Ms. Van
that was
Valkenburg.
going to also be my, what Peggy said was going to be my response as well.
Mr. President, I think all of council knows that we cover our employees with workers' comp because it's such a large part of our budget. I would assume they know that. I don't want to assume it, but they're covered also, so we're all covered.
I have absolutely no reason to doubt your expertise on this, Ms. Brickway. I was just talking to council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Brickway.
I was on fire department for 33 years, and we're covered under workers' comp as well as a firefighter, so I was aware of that.
And a private company has their own bonding, I assume? Mr. Dufford, you
Yes.
would know?
Yes.
Okay. And how about the fee determination?
Mr. President, I may be able to help
Mr.
there.
Hull.
So as far as fees go, I take overtime rate because sometimes I have them go in the evening because they're too busy in the daytime. So it would be an hourly rate for labor. If it's a truck driver, that's an hourly rate. There's administration fee, there's rental fee for the equipment, and fuel fee. And that usually balances out to be right around $250 on average.
$250 per hour, or?
Oh, no, the entire job that's an average of going in to cut a lawn.
Okay, and would that be consistent across hiring a private contractor as well?
I've never asked another contractor to cut the grass, Because usually high grass, we've been cutting that from what the guys tell me since service department started. So grass has been, been a problem for a long time, so. And when I went back to look to see how it was billed, then I just took it and went with that way. So and I think it's fair. You have to make it so that they follow the law. So if it's, like when I read in here about the not less than 25, that's the rental of the mower. So what about all the salaries and all that? So
Well, that's on top of the fee, right?
yeah, I didn't read it all, but I'm sure that that's part of it. But the way I do it, there would be no extra because it all comes under whoever it involves is listed there.
Okay, and what if the village were to hire a private contractor for that?
I would have to get an estimate you point taking on who to hire.
Right.
Normally in the village here, since I've been here, that I was always told by the people that work for the village, they always tell me, now I'm talking about contractors and stuff, that St. Bernard has always chosen the lowest bid. So I would follow that, but I don't know about the next person. So that is a valid point. Do you know what happens if he says, oh, this is so-and-so, give him them, or if this is so-and-so, give him this company.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a
Yeah.
fee schedule,
Yeah.
because otherwise this has the potential for abuse.
Yes, or they just don't hire out, as long as it's just grass cutting. Grass mowing, the service department can handle that, either after hours or if they have a not so busy day, they can go up and knock it out.
And this is another question that I would appreciate if council knew the answer to. Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 21? Please state your name and address for the record.
Carol Eubank, 70 Angels Way. And I apologize if this is repetitive, but I have yet to really understand what the process would be for targeting particular yards or homeowners, and how those yards are determined, who does that, and what is the process that the homeowner then endures.
Mr. President.
Mr. Poe.
I can help with that one also. So basically what happens is a complaint for a yard comes over a complaint line. Don't identify who's complaining, don't give that information out. That's just between me and the complainant. It then goes to Robert Evans, who's our sanitarian. Robert would look at that, find the owner, contact the owner, and find out if there's any problem. So basically we investigate, is their lawnmower broken? Have they been on vacation? Had anything, a death in the family. So once that's all investigated, they are explained on what they need to do. That takes, on the new, since I've been here, we changed it. It used to take up pretty close to like a month and a half to get the grass cut. So we streamlined it, now I do 3 weeks. So they'll give it a week for that. If it's not cut and there's no movement on the cutting of the lawn, then they get a certified letter. Once they get the certified letter, they have 10 days and then we move in to cut it.
Okay. Thank you.
5 now, yeah, okay, yeah.
So there could be 2 identical lawns on other sides of St. Bernard, and one will have a neighbor complaining, and they would be targeted, but the other yard would not.
If they're not caught, that is probably true.
Okay.
But if the service department's going around and they report, TP, something happened here, usually there's can be a drawn-out process. Like the police can be involved to make a wellness check, the fire department can be there to make a wellness check. But the minute the complaint comes through, whether it be by a police officer or a service department or anyway, then we move on it.
And what specifically is the criteria for determining that a lawn is in this category?
It has to be less than 8 to 10 inches.
The grass?
Yes, and Robert does measure.
And this has nothing to do with gardens or flowers?
Flowers cannot overhang a public right-of-way
Right.
or a walkway.
Okay.
Robert will discuss that with the resident, but no, as of now, we cannot do anything about wildflowers.
So it's just tall grass and weeds?
Yeah, tall grass, and Robert calls them noxious weeds.
Okay.
Yeah. And he also pointed out to me that tall grass is a noxious weed, so. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
okay.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address council on this?
Sean Pratt, 551 Church Street. I just want to expand upon what Carol was asking about, I think, a little bit. One of the terms in here, we're defining cultivated, anything that is exceeding, any plant exceeding 10 inches. So that's not just grass. There's some exclusions here. One of the exclusions is cultivated flowers, but there's no definition of cultivated flowers. I understand that that's not new language, that's in the old ordinance, but it still causes me a little bit of concern, especially in light of the discussions that have been going on around this ordinance and wildflowers, et cetera. So can anybody answer how one would interpret cultivated flowers that would be excluded from this ordinance?
Mr. President,
Ms. Van Valkenburg.
knowing that we were fully going to address some of the issues related to, I know there've been concerns about people who have had, wildflowers and pollinator gardens and things like that in the front yard. My thought was we would address that subsequently when we were, because there are concerns. That was one of the topics of discussion, and I know that there was also concerns about whether or not we identify certain weeds by name or something. So just use the cultivated flowers was not to, for example, if you planted it in a garden or if you are tending to it, I would consider that to be a cultivated flower. I'm not sure exactly what I'm not excluding wildflowers if they are, if you've planted those or you've put seeds down for them and then you have intended for them to be there. I was thinking that would fall broadly enough within the term cultivated flowers.
And I appreciate that. And I feel like it would be helpful if that kind of language and definition were included in the ordinance that's been passed.
Well,
I understand that you have future ordinances, but we have no idea what the pathway or time to implement that other ordinance, even if it ever comes to a vote, right? So to me, that's an important missing piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mr. President, I wanted to kind of respond to that. I think we did in laws, contracts, and claims, we were very deliberate about what we were trying to fix is the fact that the city could not enforce the existing ordinance as written. So step one was let's put in place a mechanism where we could actually enforce it as written, knowing that step two probably was going to have some pretty serious debate, which I think we're seeing here. And we wanted to allow time for that debate, but not hold up our ability to enforce the ordinances we had. So that was, Cindy, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was why we split it up and made it basically a two-step process.
Yeah, I have no complaint about splitting it up. It's just more the point that since you are now aiming to make an enforceable ordinance, so that raises a specter of more enforcement than has been in the past, and there's this language in there that's a bit vague in my mind. So if I have a neighbor that calls in a complaint because they don't like my 12-inch tall or 36-inch tall flowers, what's the response, and how am I sure that that kind of harassment won't occur? Thanks.
Mr. President, so I think, Sean, to answer your question, that criteria, that threshold, the thought is no different than it would have been before. So if before that would have been viewed as against the ordinance, it would still be. If before it wasn't, it wouldn't be. Now, I hear what you're saying. There might be more enforcement, so maybe I care more now. But it's not really different. It's just.
I understand it's not
yeah.
different, but the fact that you're reviewing and putting in a revised ordinance.
Right.
These kinds of vague definitions, you have the opportunity to fix them.
Yeah, and I agree. We should take that opportunity.
Because we can't just rely on the goodwill of the people who are currently doing the job, Mr. Paul, council, whoever. There are going to be other people next year and the year after that. So we should really be thinking about those things.
Yeah, Mr. President, I think we agree with that. We just don't want to hold up our ability to enforce what we have while we have that healthy debate. Because there's clearly a lot of grass yards in St. Bernard that need to be addressed now. And we had a lot of feedback from the community, why aren't you taking care of this? Why aren't you taking care of that? And the reality was the ordinance as written was too vague to allow us to do it in a reasonable way. So we just want to do that in a reasonable way. At the same time, we all know that there's a lot of people that want this issue addressed, but this discussion could take us 6-8 months. And by then it'll be fall and it won't matter. And people have been staring at terrible looking yards all summer. We didn't want to do that.
Barb Torbeck, 220 Bank Avenue. I lived with this situation for 15 years, a vacant house next door to me. And the old ordinance, just forget it. Fortunately, somebody did purchase the house. Things have improved. My question is, one of the things I ran into with the old was I would make the complaint because the grass was taller than the fence line. So we're well beyond 8 to 10 inches. And then they would address that. Back then it was, oh, well, we have to give them notice, they get 30 days. The owner lived in New York, then we got to send them certified. All the certified came back, but anyway. And then when we get to the end of summer, winter come, oh, the grass is all down. So boom, the next year it's back up again. Same situation. For 15 years I complained about this. And every year it had to restart. Is that the way this ordinance is going to be? That the complaint comes in 1 year, whatever happens, happens, they take care of it, whatever. Is there any notice period, you know, like 3 strikes, you're out? You're not going to be given any forgiveness? Because for me, it happened, I complained 15 years in a row. 15 years it was addressed with the same nonsense. It went down in the winter, came up in the summer, and we're going to start it all over again. So once the season's over, the ordinance is over. Am I right?
Mr. President,
Mr. DeBerke.
Farrell, correct me if I'm wrong, but yes, you got 1 calendar year. So if somebody gets a complaint now, they got 5 days, once timely service paper, they got 5 days to take care of it. Otherwise, the service department will come in and take care of it. Then beginning next year, start all over again.
Okay, fair enough, as long as I know now. You know, like that didn't make any sense for 15 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hello. Alec Mackey, 212 Harvey Court. We did experience, I'm a newer resident here. This will be my 2nd year. We did experience like a rental property on the corner of my court there. It became a real big issue with ticks and other bad insects that we don't really want. With small children with a stroller going by, we would straight up just miss it. We would just go around and cross the street again. Don't like it. It's unsafe to do that with some children anyway without a crosswalk. The thing is, though, is that it's a rental property, and we all know how rental properties are sometimes. They're abused. So one thing that I really was interested about, was there any idea if the property is being rented, which from my understanding, you have to actually go through a process to have the rental property in St. Bernard, but more fines or more like, hey, we double what we're doing here because you should be taking care of this property if it's a rental property. So that's just something I wanted to see if that's something that we could escalate, especially with like a landlord or a rental situation. Because I personally work in HVAC too, so I'm going out to these guys' houses all the time, and the tenants are not going to be cutting that grass. So I'm just seeing it everywhere in all these communities about these grass issues. So it's one of those things that I feel strongly about because I have to deal with slum lords all the time. I have to get this stuff paid and this stuff fixed AC-wise and furnace-wise. So I know the way they feel about their properties. It's just a money thing. So I'm just curious if that's something you guys are up for or not, but I think it should be taken extremely seriously on a rental property.
Mr. President.
Mr. Schulmar.
Valerie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we changed the language it used to be you had to get in touch with the person that owned the property, which was a hurdle. And almost an impossible hurdle, honestly, in a lot of cases, like if they're in New York or wherever they're at, and if they don't want to hear from you especially, and they don't. Now, the ordinance should read, all we have to do is post the notice on the property, and 5 days from there, we can go in and cut it.
Okay.
That correct? That was an important change, and you're absolutely right, one of the biggest problems we were having.
Okay. So any more of the financial side of it, trying to charge them more or anything like that? Or with the lien, I suppose that would be more the progressing of that? Is that correct?
Ms. Van Valkenburg.
Yeah, sorry, excuse me, Mr. President. I would have to look into the legality of charging a rental property more. I'm not sure that there's really a basis in law for that.
Yeah.
I would have to look into that. My thought would be probably not, but I do think changing it to not just the, serving the owner or person in control, which can be a tenant or a renter, and yes, we can put a notice on, we don't have to do it by certified mail, we can put the notice on the property in a place where it can be seen, and that is sufficient. So I think that gives us grounds to move forward much more promptly, so hopefully we can avoid situation such as you experienced.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening. This is a little short, so I'll try to stand up. Hopefully you all can hear me. My name is Benjamin Fraley, and I'm at 4511 Park Place. I have lived in St. Bernard now for close to 5 years. In the 5 years that I have lived here, I have lived next to a vacant house the entire time. I'm pretty sure that this ordinance was written for me, and if the individual whom I call about once a month asking for somebody to come and cut down if they're present, thank you, and I apologize. I would like to echo some of the concerns that some of my other citizens have voiced. The language is a little bit vague, but I also think that that can also be a good thing. And typically with law, it's good to leave things up to interpretation. And I typically think that anyone who's going to be conducting this job will be doing it from a common sense and a good heart, good intention perspective. That being said, I think this is insanely overdue. I think that the previous process was unbelievably inefficient. And hopefully this will continue to encourage individuals to take care of their properties in the way that a lot of the good upstanding citizens have. I think maybe that there should be some language included for exceptions for individuals who might be perhaps older or have some other issues with taking care of their lawn, and maybe have some sort of process for appealment for them. I think that might be some good language to include. This might be out of the scope of this ordinance as well, but in addition to having a vacant home next to for 5-ish years, I've also dealt with pests, be it raccoons, possums, and all of the alike, cats as well. Actually just saw a raccoon at the vacant property the other day too. So it's probably out of scope of this ordinance specifically, but perhaps in the future we could create another ordinance to address whom that responsibility might fall to. Again, that might be me being an ignorant citizen, but I've called the police department, I've called the fire department, I've called the health department, I've called the dog warden, and I've all gotten the runaround from more or less everybody on who should be doing what. About the raccoon that I saw the other day, I called City Hall and they sent out the service department. Doesn't sound like that is a common practice or not, but if it is, that should also probably be posted somewhere or perhaps included in another ordinance. Again, I just like to stress that I think that this is well overdue, and I think that this is a good step in the right direction for encouraging citizens to take care of their yards properly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Ms.
can
Brickworth.
I just ask a question, and I think she said her name was Miss Torbeck. I'm sorry I didn't get it, but lived down on Bank. If what I heard before is true, I think what she was saying might be handled in this, that once you're fined once, you don't have to go through the whole process again if they continue to let go. Now, I get year to year it starts over, but week to week, am I correct on that?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay, so that might help you a little bit. It's not gonna help you year to year, but it's gonna help you week to week. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Carol Eubank, 70 Angels Way. First question, and this is probably pretty naive, but I'm wondering why so many measures are passed as emergency measures? So I know most of you know the answer to that. I do not.
I'll take it. Basically, these items are discussed at committee of the whole. These particular ordinances tonight, laws, contracts, and claims, I believe met last week, 2 weeks ago. It had been discussed prior to that, and usually everything is talked about at committee of the whole. If there are any concerns, or if, we always ask when we're reading the ordinances, if there are someone in the audience, we may have it go regular course, or other things that need to go regular course. We're into August, and the weeds and grass cutting kind of needs to be done now, because council meets, other than a special meeting, council meets a council meeting once a month. So if we'd read this, if we did it not by emergency, it would basically take until September, October to basically pass this. Grass cutting is almost over by then.
Okay.
But hopefully that answers a little bit.
Thank you.
Mr. President, also a number of times that they are financially related ordinances, and it's something that kind of comes up unexpectedly. Like we may have the opportunity to take advantage of grant monies, or a special purchase, or something like that. It needs to be moved on because, as Mr. Asbach explained, it would just take too long to go regular course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So my other concern is that this all sounds very vindictive, that we're judging this guy and that guy and going to put a lien on his house, and we're not offering them any support. A lot of us here are from the garden club. We have work days, and we work together to make things pretty. I would like to suggest we might put together a coalition of good-minded, helpful St. Bernard citizens who would be there as a support to people who had a problem. I mean, just so that it's not all one-sided and you're just, you know, someone who could step in before they get the lien on the house.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
when one of the gentlemen that was just speaking said, you know, do this respectfully and, you know, with some common sense, we talked about that in our meeting. So like, you know, Tommy Paul was talking. So if a policeman comes in or a fireman comes in there for some health care reason or whatever it is, and reports of the high grass or whatever it might be, you know, and see if there's an issue, like do they have a broken lawnmower or something, and it comes back to the administration. You know, of course we're gonna, if they're a sick person, you know, is there anybody else around that we know cuts grass, we can call and say, could you take care of this person? You know, and do it like within the 5 days. So I think there is some, it's not really all vindictive, but these are the ones who continually.
No, I understand.
So
But-
yeah, go, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just wondering if we could actually build that in to have a group of people who identify themselves who would be available to help someone who's just ill, can't afford it, whatever.
Great idea.
And,
I think it's a great idea, because we don't want to be totally vindictive. That's not the purpose.
It feels that way. I mean,
Right,
it
but there are
sounds
some
that way.
people who habitually
Yeah.
just disrespect this law to begin with. So that's what we're trying to get to.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Mr. Taberky.
my comment too, if you got a group of people together to do that, you have to worry about liability also. If somebody gets hurt, who's going to pay for it?
All right, anyone else? If not, do I have a motion to make Ms. All right.
Hello, Katie Joyce, 4412 Tower Avenue. I just was concerned about the 905.06, the investigation of violations. Can you tell me a little more about, does that just come with the same, is this the same that we were talking about, a complaint, and then you go in and, yeah, I don't know. Can you tell me a little more about that investigation, please?
Mr. President?
Mr. Paul.
Yes, we have the sanitarian he's part-time for the village. When I get complaints or a list of complaints, I send them to him. He comes out and evaluates, gets in touch with the owner or the person that lives there, explains to them what has to happen, If it's not the owner, then we try to find the owner's name, and then we go from there. So all the violations, say like if the only complaint was the high grass, and he gets there and sees building, he will turn it over to building that he saw here, because that's what he did in his life. So if you're looking at that, he would look at noxious weeds, he would look at trash. If there's litter in your yard that doesn't belong there, trash cans without lids, if he sees that and it's all tore up by animals, he will also explain that to you, that it's against our law there also. So and it is the same person. He's been here since I've been here and before me, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of when renting a property, unless there's an emergency, like the landlord couldn't come into your space. And I wonder how that relates to this. You know, are we just talking about what's visible in the front? Are we talking about you're able to go in the backyard or?
No,
different things like that?
Mr. President. So Robert is not allowed to make access to any property. So basically what happens is, if the complainant is next door, I would say, can Robert enter your property to have a look at the back? And normally you get a yes. But normally though also, and I want everybody to understand this, when Robert comes in and usually makes contact with the owners, that grass is usually cut or it is resolved. And as far as then vindictive, if we find out that their lawnmower is broken, they had a death in the family, we give them lots of time to recuperate, to get their grass cut. We're not allowed to give grass cutting names, but you know, there's people that would fire names at me. Yes, he's good. Yes, he can do it. Yes, he can do it. But you can't, as a village, you can't advertise that.
Sure.
So basically, it's not all harsh and mean. Since I've been here, I've probably fined maybe 8 times, and 4 of them are the same owner. So, but then people come in compliance. I do have a quick tail, and I really love it. It makes me laugh. So we had a person who never cut the lawn. So I wrote her on my own stationery, you need to get a lawn service. She ends up calling me and says, I have a lawn service. I said, they aren't doing a very good job. She goes, well, they come in and charge me $250 and they cut my grass. And I said, how often are they coming in? She goes, when it gets long, like, I said, how high, like 8 to 10 inches? And she goes, yeah. I said, that's me. She thought St. Bernard was the lawn service. So, you know, once you explain it to them, and then they go out and they cut it themselves, because she thought that was her lawn service, and she was happy to pay the $250, which you kind of think to yourself, okay, maybe it should be higher, but then it's not reasonable, you know, that's kind of unfair, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. President?
Ms. Brickway.
I don't know if this will help a little bit. We have not had a lien on anyone's property for grass cutting since 2012. So I know I keep hearing vindictive and things like that. It really isn't. Like, I listened to Tom on the phone with his people and trying, like, I knew the story he just told, but trying to work out what is the circumstance and how can we handle it. I've cut my neighbor's grass. One hurt his hand, one had cancer. You just do it. So I think there is a lot of that. This is for the people that I think are more like, I'm not gonna cut it, and what are you gonna do about it? So I can tell you that. So since 2012, there's not been a lien for grass cutting. I don't know if that helps or not, but I think that should show the council's intent.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. If not, could I have a motion to amend the ordinance to take out designer and make it designee?
Mr. President,
Mr. Taberky.
make a motion to amend ordinance 21-2023 to remove the word designer in 905.05A and change it to designee.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
Motion by Mr. Taberky, seconded by Ms. Housefeld to change the word designer to designee in section 905.5. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. Clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Brickway?
Aye.
Ms. Housefeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schildmeyer?
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays. Motion carries. Council, what is your pleasure on the adoption of ordinance number 21, 2023 as amended?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
I make a motion to adopt ordinance number 21, 2023 as amended.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld, to adopt ordinance number 21, 2023 as amended. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Rickwick?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schultmeyer?
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 21, 2023 as amended is adopted as read. Clerk, will you please give the first reading of ordinance number 24, 2023?
Ordinance number 24, 2023, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a joint agreement between the Board of County Commissioners, Hamilton County, Ohio, and the Village of St. Bernard, Ohio, to administer a community revitalization grant award for property redevelopment and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 24, 2023. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 24, 2023.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld, to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 24, 2023. Are there any remarks? Not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 24, 2023? If not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Rickwick?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schultmeyer?
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
make a motion to adopt ordinance number 24, 2023.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld, to adopt ordinance number 24, 2023. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Brickwick?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Here, her, aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schultmeyer?
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 24, 2023 is adopted as read. This time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President,
Mr. Ray Culbertson.
make a motion, we adjourn.
I'll second that.
Motion by Mr. Ray Culbertson, seconded by Ms. Bettinghouse to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.